Welcome back. You're here with Goldberg. Today I wanted to go more in depth on the coronavirus. I'm going to inject a little bit of levity, at least to start. If you find that offensive, if you're triggered, that's fine. Just indict me, scream, and complain. Perfectly legitimate responses. To begin, we had some interesting data coming out of the internet dating, that whole realm, and it was kind of fascinating because some people were making the point coronavirus is coming from China, so we should expect that, it'll be over shortly. Nothing made in China lasts very long, as you all well know. In addition, some women were saying on Tinder, I think even some men from the article that I'd read, had started to put up stuff on Tinder saying, yes, you can put it in my ass, but you have to use hand sanitizer, so that's another bizarre dynamic that we have to consider. Branching out from that, there are some of the bigger, healthcare concerns, health-related concerns. I know there were CDC guidelines telling Americans to quit it with the handshakes, refrain from, handshakes. And in response, from what I heard, Jeffrey Dahmer switched off his blender. So, that's just something to consider. And then there was the report encouraging people to go out and stock up on extra rolls of toilet paper. And they were saying that, you should expect to be crapping a lot more. That's the idea. If you need, you're running out, if the shelves are bare, you can always photocopy it. So that's just, it's a good launching point for what we're going to be discussing in the rest of this video. I will begin with this. I've watched in the last month and a half 2 documentaries. One was on Zika and Ebola, and the other related to factory farming. The first one made in 2016, the other made, I think, in 2017. What's interesting is that both of them concluded by saying, based upon the current state of affairs, food production both in other countries and the United States, we are high risk for the breakout of some kind of animal-based virus, and it's not being taken seriously. So I thought this was kind of fascinating. I do think the coronavirus is being exaggerated, and it's being pushed by the media. We'll be discussing that a little bit later on. It is relevant, obviously. Safety concerns should be taken. But that was just fascinating because you have instances where obviously HIV was traced to monkey meat, I believe. You had the Nipah outbreak, which they said was ostensibly in Bangladesh. They'd shave the tree bark and then try to drain out the sap because it's a kind of a delicacy of sorts to drink it. Well, they did some research and they found that bats were drinking the sap, and then urinating into their little jugs where it was collecting. So I don't know I know there's some red pillars who advocate homeopathy and the supremacy of Eastern ideas. I don't know if that's one of the arguments. Men should drink bat urine in order to enhance their femininity. It's just a consideration. But at any rate, and they were saying people were dying or having developmental issues like children who survived. And other instances with Zika, it was from mosquitoes. So they started breeding male mosquitoes who would mate with the females, and the larvae would die. Which, of course, it's unethical. Yeah, well, you pick your battles, I guess. And Ebola, I believe, was traced to either bats or to monkey meat, like eating contaminated meat. We are lucky we don't have something like Ebola because it's like a 90% casualty rate. And so the reason we have to consider that is that it is really critical that Americans wake up to what Big Ag is doing. It's really critical we wake up to the problem of having this kind of, no holds barred. You look at these international food stores. I don't go into them much just because they tend to smell bad because of some of the foods that's being sold there. I'm not confident that the production standards, particularly in China, are up to snuff. We need to be taking this more seriously because coronavirus may not be that deadly if you're younger, but if you get something like Ebola, if you get something like that, you could easily have some of the more extreme headlines we're seeing. They could be made true. And instead of just trying, it will never touch us, it's not a big deal, people need to get real because we need to seriously change the way the government operates. We need to be looking at the EU in terms of food preparation standards. Otherwise, yes, this is a very real risk. And if you're allowing stuff to be brought into the country under the guise of it, applies to a particular delicacy, you don't know where it's coming from, that again is another critical problem. So this should not be a partisan matter. It should be something where people just unite and say, okay, let's address the problem. Other issue I wanted to cover quickly. Claims of, don't call it the Wuhan virus. Don't call it the Chinese coronavirus. It's xenophobic and racist. And I was like, okay, there was an article in Huffington Post and she's complaining about how I'm Chinese and when I cough in Sydney, people look at me weird. Look, in general, when I'm around someone who coughs or sneezes a lot, I'm not very comfortable because I'm like, okay, you probably are carrying something if it's, repeated. I don't want to get sick. I'm just in general, my personal opinion, I don't like being sick. Maybe there's something wrong with me, but you can judge that, I suppose. They're saying it's xenophobic. Oh, you can't shut the borders. Well, thank God we had someone who doesn't believe in globalist open borders insanity because it could be a lot worse potentially. This is something. If you want to call that xenophobic and racist, then you should go back, you progressives, and amend every history book that accuses Europeans of genocide on the basis, largely, of them introducing diseases to the New World, including that completely ahistorical bullshit about smallpox blankets, people like Ward Churchill. So just understand the context of what you're saying and how stupid it sounds, based upon what you've said in other instances. Yes, very much so. We should be incredibly skeptical. In fact, I remember when I was like 12 or 13 on an internet forum, I made the point that I said, look, you cannot trust what the Chinese government says. You cannot trust products that come out of China. A good example of this, I bought probably a month or so ago at the dollar store. I bought a pair of earbuds because mine had just burned out after like a couple of years I was using them. And I understand they're not going to be Bose, they're not going to be Skull Candy, but I'm like, okay, they'll probably work for what I need. And I think it was as soon as I started using them, one of the buds died out, and then the other one died within a couple of days. But you talk to the neoliberals, the free marketers, that's great because you can get a cheap product. Even if the product is garbage and won't last, at least it's cheap. That's the argument. And anyway, when I made this point about China, I was accused again, you're a racist, you're a xenophobe, which are the typical responses of people who are afraid of dealing with a reality, so they'll just try to shut you down. I don't trust anything that the Chinese are saying. I think it's interesting how all of a sudden it all leveled off. They've got it under control. But it's such a big problem in Italy. It's such a big problem in the United States. Again, we're assuming that you can trust the Chinese Communist Party, which I do not. But that's why I'm starting to get a little bit more tinfoil hat about this. Not because I think it's not a real issue. I think absolutely you have to treat it seriously. But rather, you notice with all this financial sell-off, it seems a little bit extreme given what we're actually going through, given what the actual casualty rate is. And I think what's going on is Wall Street is manipulating stuff, just like they did in 2008 with oil, just like they did in 2014, the same thing. Wall Street is trying to get a better angle to buy. And so what they're trying to do is get people to panic sell, shorting the market, and they're going to turn around and buy these things discounted and lock in like 30 or 40% gains. They're tired of just relying on stock buybacks and a little trickle up here and there. So that's what we're seeing. And if you start encountering bailouts that go to industries that aren't even affected, like banks, you're going to know it's true. Okay. The way it worked was in 2008, Paulson, who was ex-Goldman Sachs, he gave money to anyone who basically was benefit Goldman Sachs, and he let Lehman Brothers, a big Goldman opponent, fail. Lawrence Summers ensured that it continued with Geithner, again, supporting the same people. And of course, now we have Mnuchin, who's from Goldman Sachs. So I would suspect that they're going to have some kind of tomfoolery, and I'll probably do analysis of these rescue packages because, and this is really critical, the so-called checks to Americans are another example of where if you are a single middle-class person, they screw you over. You make $99,000, you get nothing. And they're acting like $99,000 is a lot of money, which of course it's not. So it's all this experience that has kind of motivated me to get involved in politics. I don't relish it. I don't want a political career. I'm not interested. But you start to realize how many BS things are set up in this country. If you're not super poor, if you're not super rich, it's pretty much a middle finger to you. And it makes no sense. And all this overreaction, this let's shut down the economy, is doing untold damage to working people, to middle class people. It's them allowing your retirement to be destroyed needlessly. It's them essentially destroying entire industries. And then they're going to turn around and try to get bailouts from the government. Classic Wall Street gambit. You have to be aware of these things. That's why I'm considering getting involved. Not quite entirely on that position, but I probably will be in the future. So with Corona, I mean, what can you do? Use common sense, but also don't be a paranoiac, okay? We're going to get through this. I expect the markets are going to recover. But if you get into a panic zone right now, you're going to lose a lot of money at the expense of the elites on Wall Street.